especially for juniors, but a lot of sophomore families are looking at this question as well. And so the hot question of the week relates to, what should my students be doing now that there are certain limitations on activities that might or might not affect the competitiveness of my students? And so the hot question of the week relates around this. And, you know, considering the situation with COVID-19, a lot of students are having difficulty coming up with ways to access all of the planning, all of the activities that they've been doing at school. And so many of the students that we're talking to and many parents are saying, no one is actually doing anything for activities. But this is actually false. When we think about a student's competitiveness for university admission, it has to do with their preparedness for life on college. And, you know, outside of the academic profile of a student, the extracurricular activities help students demonstrate commitment and ability to manage time, focus, certain development of skill, as well as influence. And it's a student's extracurricular profile that differentiates a great student from an amazing student, from an extraordinary student. And so in this incredibly challenging time where, you know, extracurricular activities are limited to the home and to online environments, you know, students are really needing to get creative, to take the initiative, to transform those activities that are near and dear to them into online formats. And sometimes that involves exercising project and time management, as well as this commitment and creativity. And to give you an example of some of the things that students are doing, I have a student athlete who is struggling a lot with the limitations on the home, but mercifully he has the basketball court in the backyard. And so he worked out a project plan for 2 key goals that he wanted to achieve before the end of Eid, at the end of Ramadan. And so he created kind of like a weekly check-in and monitoring of progress for himself, where he could reach and develop certain skills in handling the ball with both hands at an equal level, as well as increasing his vertical height in a jump. Other students are transforming their social activities to online activities, as far as teaching or tutoring with other students. Another student is taking, you know, their love of cooking and transforming it into working with partnering restaurants and delivery options to deliver meals that they cook and create to families during the month of Ramadan. And so looking at these extracurricular activities and initiatives is really one of the key questions that students can be doing. Now, universities do understand that because of these limitations, many of the traditional activities are not available to students, and students will not be penalized. But those who are taking these initiatives and creating these experiences, not only for themselves, but for others, are going to have an advantage at the end of the day. And that is our hot topic of the week. And now I'm going to ask if participants themselves have any questions. Yes. So I do have a question live here, and parents, if you do have questions, or students, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we will attend to them live. And this question comes from an anonymous attendee, and it's like, what are your thoughts and experience on the UCAS and Oxbridge applications? This is an excellent question, and one actually will be hosting a webinar on Wednesday in collaboration with a company, CarMax, that we work with, who actually partners with the UCAS and Oxbridge application process. Because here at Hale, we specialize in US admissions process and Canadian admissions process, and our partners, CarMax, cover the UCAS and Oxbridge applications, as well as some applications for universities in Europe. Okay. does anyone else have any additional questions? I don't see any yet here. And so just one moment, and I'm going to pull up another one of the burning questions from this week, because I'm sure many of you would share this similar question. And it involves, what do universities who are declaring themselves to be test optional actually mean by that? And so when the University of California made big news, the whole system made big news in the last couple of weeks by announcing that they would be going test optional for the upcoming admissions season. Tufts University also declared themselves to be test optional for the upcoming 3 years. This is big news. But a lot of universities already were test optional, and many others will continue to declare themselves test optional throughout the season, depending on how they choose to operate their admissions cycle coming in the fall and even in the year after that for those students who are in grade 10 right now. A test optional for a university means very simply that students have a choice of whether or not to submit SAT or ACT test scores for consideration in the admissions process. Now, what we like to think is that universities recognize students are more than their test scores, and that they are going test optional to lessen the burden on students in these difficult times in which schooling, test preparation, and test dates are experiencing significant disruptions. And that is actually true. That is true. What is also true, however, is not as magnanimous as we would like for this to be. Because what a university is also saying strategically when they declare themselves test optional is that if we do not require all students to submit their SAT or ACT test scores, we only have to report the scores of the students who voluntarily submit their scores. And universities report these scores to ranking agencies. And it is an important component of maintaining their own rank. And so when a school is going test optional, they're also hedging a bet, minimizing the risk of lower test scores coming into their applicant pool that they would then need to report to ranking agencies. So if they are test optional, they only want to see and expect to see the scores of students who voluntarily submit them. And traditionally, these are the highest test scorers. So what this means for students is that students who actually have test scores for these exams will have a significant advantage in this process. And so again, students, if you're struggling with motivation, if you have a goal of a test score, and you're hearing all these universities talk about going test optional, not every university is going test optional. And for those that are, they would still appreciate your high score. So do prepare and take the test seriously. But for others of you who do have strong academic profiles, strong extracurricular profiles, what this means is that you may actually have a few more options to add to your school list that would otherwise have been likely closed to you for these newly test optional schools. And that is actually really exciting. And that's a conversation you should have with your consultants for sure. And I have another question here related to the same question. How can I build a university list without SAT scores? And this is an excellent question. For those students who are opting not to take the scores or who are not happy with their scores, there's a whole host of universities that are truly test optional or that take alternatives to the SAT or ACT scores. And those are schools that we call test flexible. And for those universities, you can see a nice list on a website called fairtest.org. Again, that is fairtest.org. FAIRTEST.org. And there you can find a list for international students as well as domestic US students of universities that have test optional and test flexible priorities and availabilities. And so if you do not have these scores and do not plan to take these tests, this is definitely a rich resource for you, and if you're without a consultant, but for you and your consultant if you do have one, to use in order to pull out some appropriate schools. And outside of that, the other considerations that go into a school list, because US students genuinely are more than your test scores, you're going to want to look at your area of study, some other preferences as to how you like to learn, and speak with mentors, your consultants, your school counselor about how your extracurricular and academic profile and abilities match these students so that you can make your case without these scores. I hope that answered your question in that regard. And here we have another one. What are your thoughts on taking extra AP tests at the end of the year after COVID-19? This is a gorgeous question. And it really can depend, because if you are already taking the AP courses and you're sitting for the exams in May, you definitely want to do that to get that validation of your academic performance. And do make use of the test prep materials that the College Board has provided for the new format of the exam, which is to be taken at home under 45 minutes. Now, for those students who are just going to take an AP exam in areas of study or a class outside of what they are normally taking in school, this is up for debate. Because if you're taking an AP exam as an independent candidate without having taken the course in school, pardon me, I need to cough, then it may or may not be worth the investment of the time. Some universities are already stating that yes, they will grant college credit for AP tests with certain scores that meet their criteria, just as they would the old format of the test. But some universities are saying that due to the shortened format of the exam, they will not be giving credit for these AP tests. And so this is definitely something you're going to want. If you've got certain set of universities already in mind, look at their current policy related to the after COVID-19 AP test exam and the upcoming admission cycle. And if you see that, yes, they are accepting that credit and the investment of time could be worth your while to actually sit the exam itself. Now, if you've prepared for it and you're ready to take it, it's not going to hurt you to take it. But if you're on the fence as to whether you want to devote the extra time to the AP exam outside of what you're doing for class, that could depend. All right. So we have a couple more questions here. Just one moment, let me review them. Aha. Yes, the next two questions relate to how do you build a university list? And a question following the Building a Strategic School List Parent Edition. Thank you very much for these questions, because this actually is a 2-hour workshop that I have been recording furiously in the last few days to get online and sent out to parents by the end of this week. So you did not miss it. It is actually on the way. But to answer, Muhammad's question about how do you know if a university is a fit for you and if you should apply, I can actually give a very quick answer to that question because it relates to a little bit of strategy. Now, for students who are trying to assess where they fit for a university, the first component to building a strategic school list has to do with your academic profile, with your courses, the grades, how you're performing inside of your particular high school, as well as any standardized test scores that you actually have. And that academic profile is kind of the baseline, along with your area of study, to identifying schools where you are a fit. Now, these schools do publish the average, grades and the average test scores of their admitted students. And you can assess yourself where you fall on this trajectory of what we call a middle 50%. If your academic profile is above the average student, that's what we would consider a safety school for academic profile. Now, reach and target schools, that can depend on your extracurricular achievement level and your ability to write. And so for you, Mohammed, you want to make sure that they have, the areas of study that you not only are very interested in focusing on, but also that you want to try out in your time, that you are within range of the academic profile of the average admitted student, and that you have an extracurricular profile that is in line with your area of interest, as well as the type of university that you are hoping to attend. And if you have any wish for scholarship, or if you have any need for financial assistance to cover the cost of education, those are special considerations in building a school list, where you'll want to have more schools where your academic profile is higher in order to attract that funding, or creating geographic diversity to attract some of that funding for you. But that university as a fit, really that's so individual to each student, because you have a personality and a certain set of goals. And that involves understanding where you fall at the average profile, but also doing research in the university using some of the tools available to you, like College Niche, College Planner Pro, Custom College Plan. Okay, and then here are a couple of additional questions. This one again goes back to the extracurriculars. This parent or this person is asking, what is too much? Like, how do you know if you're doing too much or too few extracurricular activities? And how do you know which ones to include in your applications or which ones not to include? And this is an excellent question, because it really depends on the student themselves. When it comes to extracurricular activities, universities really don't care what it is a student is involved in, as much as they care how a student is doing this. Are they demonstrating commitment to a type of activity over a period of time, over a period of years? Have they, focused on a particular area of study and gone deep in their skill development? That is as attractive as students who demonstrate, commitment and achievement to a variety of areas of study or areas of extracurricular activity. How much and too little depends on a student's own goals, time, and level of achievement in school. So that is actually a very personal kind of answer. As for which ones you should include in your life, the ones that you have demonstrated commitment to, the ones where you've also developed your own initiatives and leadership skills, or a particular special talent such as art, music, or especially athletics. These are the ones that many students must devote a large amount of time to succeed in, and therefore take up a lot of that extra time available And so basically, can you show commitment through them? Can you show ability to manage time and projects, as well as taking something you love and sharing with other people, and an ever-growing sphere of influence? And if they meet these criteria and they've helped you develop skills and mean a lot to you personally, then you definitely want to include them in your application. And here's a family that has a wonderful question, one of my favorite questions and one of the most overlooked aspects of the admissions game. And this question is, does the passport you apply with make a difference on your chance of getting accepted? And this one has a caveat, especially for those that have more than one passport. Now, in an application, you will actually list all of your nationalities, all of the countries of citizenship. And yes, geography matters. And there are no quotas or number caps of students coming from different parts of the world. But admissions offices are actually trying to create a representation of the society that is inside the applicant pool of students who apply to US universities. And on average, 10% of all applications to US universities are coming from international students. And this is data you can actually find on the Common App. And which is why when you go to look at the percentage of international students on campus, it's going to hover somewhere between 10 and 15%. And that's because it's representative of the application pool. Now, inside of the international student application pool, there's also definitely a different set of competition inside of it. For example, over a third of the applications coming to US universities over the last 5 years have come from mainland China. They have a brutal competition. The second largest set come from India. And so these students also face a high level of competition disproportionate to what's going on. If you're coming from Singapore, it's a country of 20 miles by 20 miles. Everybody wants Singaporean students. That passport is gold in this process, right? And it has to do with creating this representation. But as a rule of thumb, when you look at the acceptance rate for students at a particular university, if you're a domestic US citizen or permanent resident, the published rate applies pretty much to you. For international students, the rule of thumb is divide that admission rate by 10% and you will have a much more accurate picture of your chances for admission. Okay, and now for another question here from Mohammed. It's like, how useful are online courses to an application? Are they to be used for wider reading and knowledge or for certification? Is it worth paying for the certificate, for example, if doing the course as self-paced, or is the free course enough? Excellent question. Online courses, any kind of initiative you take to learn a new skill and develop a new skill, as an educator, is absolutely worthwhile. And admissions officers consider this absolutely worthwhile. If it's a course through Coursera or edX where they only offer a certificate, for example, the free course is enough to show that initiative and to build that skill. If, however, you are interested in achieving college credit for your work by taking an online course delivered through a university, it is worth paying for in order to actually achieve that credit, because you will then likely be able to transfer that to the university where you eventually enroll. And that will save space in your coursework for your college years. Hopefully that helps there. Right, and then here's a last question. Do Indian students in a British curriculum school need to take the TOEFL, as some schools are recommending? This is another actually really good question about the testing requirements of universities. Many universities will waive the TOEFL and IELTS requirements for students who are non-native speakers who have attended a British curriculum or an English-speaking curriculum school for 3 to 4 years. Unfortunately, not every university will do so. This past season, University of Texas Austin was a notable example, and they required it of students regardless. And so the answer to this question can depend on the schools that are actually on your list. And for those students who have been studying in English, who need to take the TOEFL, I recommend taking that at the end of August, beginning of September. Just get it done. Get it done, get it on record. If the universities on your list or one of the universities on your list do require it. Okay, great. And that's actually all of the questions we have in the queue for this week. I do encourage everyone to tune in next week, and I will be able to walk you through what does it actually mean forfeit, as well as answer any of your live questions. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, hope you're having a wonderful day and have a wonderful week.